Once upon a time, not very far from us, there was a woman named Elisa. Elisa, with her 38 well-lived years, was an interior architect recognized for her talent in transforming chaotic spaces into environments of harmony and functionality. She spent her days drawing perfect lines, choosing balanced color palettes, and organizing every detail to create a sense of order and beauty. Paradoxically, her mind was the most cluttered and noisy room she had ever tried to decorate. It was a space where projects merged with anxieties, where compliments were overshadowed by a single criticism, and where silence was an invitation for the incessant noise of rumination. Elisa was, without knowing it, a hostage to her own thoughts, a slave to a mind that refused to make peace with the present. On that specific day, a significant project had been completed and approved by the client. It was a reason for celebration. Arriving at her apartment, a refuge she herself had designed with extreme care, she smelled the comforting aroma of the dinner her partner Sophia had prepared. Sophia, a marine biologist whose serenity seemed immune to the storms that plagued Elisa's mind, greeted her with a warm hug. "I was looking forward to you coming home. I made your favorite pasta with that homemade tomato sauce and basil from the pot on the balcony," she announced, with a smile that reached her eyes. The table was set impeccably, a low candle flickered softly, and smooth jazz filled the air. Everything was, by all objective criteria, perfect. Elisa sat down, gave thanks, and served her plate. The first sip of wine was smooth, the first forkful of pasta delicious. And then, like an intrusive whisper that turns into a scream, a thought crossed her mind. What was that slightly long pause the client took when I showed the final proposal? Maybe he didn't truly like it. Maybe he's just being polite and is internally unhappy. That single thought, tiny and probably unfounded, was the spark. In seconds, Elisa's mind, eager for something to chew on, latched onto it. The flavor of the pasta vanished, replaced by the metallic taste of anxiety. The soft jazz became an irritating background noise. She mentally replayed every facial expression of the client, every word exchanged in the confirmation email, searching for flaws, for hidden signs of disapproval. Sophia, noticing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, asked, "Is everything okay, love? Isn't the pasta to your taste?" Elisa shook her head, trying to dissipate the clouds. "It's all great, it's just today's project. Something doesn't feel right." Sophia, familiar with those mental labyrinths, tried to calm her. "Elisa, he loved it. He sent a thank you email, remember? It's all finalized. Breathe and enjoy your food. You are here, present with me." But Elisa's mind had already departed for another dimension. She was no longer at dinner. She was in that client's office, rereading imaginary subtext. The need for reassurance, to silence the annoying voice, became urgent, a cerebral itch that needed to be scratched. "Just 1 minute," she said, getting up from the table. "I'll just send a quick message to my assistant, just to confirm if there hasn't been any additional feedback." Sophia sighed, looking at the candle, her face reflecting a mix of worry and resignation. Elisa picked up her phone, and the simple act of touching the lit screen seemed to activate an autopilot mode. She didn't just send one message. She opened the email, reread the conversation, opened social media to see if the client had posted anything that could be interpreted as a subtle dig. The search for relief, for confirmation that her mind was wrong, had begun. And, like the man in search of the lemon, Elisa was willing to deny the perfection of the present moment in exchange for chasing a ghost created by her own restless mind. She was about to embark on an exhausting journey for external validation, ignoring the peace that was literally right in front of her at the dinner table. The message to the assistant was sent, but the relief Elisa expected did not come. On the contrary, the silence that followed — it was Friday night, a completely irrational time to expect a reply, seemed to amplify the voice in her head. She didn't answer immediately. Is she avoiding giving me bad news? She thought, her fingers scrolling her phone screen almost automatically, as if the physical motion could speed up a digital response. The dinner, once a feast, was now just an obstacle between her and the urgent need to solve a problem that most likely didn't even exist. Sophia watched, eating quietly, her gaze laden with silent pity. She saw the person she loved disappearing into a labyrinth of her own making and knew that any attempt to pull her back at that moment would be interpreted as an invasion, not a rescue. Elisa's search for validation quickly escalated. The message to the assistant wasn't enough. She opened the client's professional LinkedIn profile. Let's see if he's online. If he is, it means he's working, maybe reviewing the project with criticism. He wasn't. Her pulse quickened a little. Worse, he's offline, perhaps discussing the project at some business dinner, expressing his dissatisfaction to others. Every possible scenario was a new, darker ramification on the tree of conjecture her mind was cultivating with vigor. She then moved on to Instagram, scouring the recent photos of everyone involved in the project, looking for a visual clue, a look, a caption that could be deciphered as a secret code about her professional competence. She found only family photos, vacation pictures, ordinary dinners. The normality of other people's lives seemed an insult to her internal turmoil. Sophia finally could no longer contain herself. "Elisa," her voice said, soft but firm, cutting through the mental noise. "The lemon isn't worth it." The phrase echoed in the room, seemingly coming from nowhere. Elisa looked up, confused, pulling away for a second from the digital whirlwind. "Lemon? What lemon? I'm talking about the project, Sophia. This is serious." Sophia shook her head slowly, a thread of sadness in her smile. "It's the same thing. Your mind decided something is missing. It decided you need this lemon, this external confirmation, for the evening to be perfect. But look around you. The food is here. It's delicious. I am here. You are safe and loved. Everything already is perfect. You're letting the food get cold and our time together slip away to run after a sour and unnecessary imaginary lemon." The analogy hit Elisa with surprising force. For a brief moment, she saw herself from the outside, a successful woman in a beautiful apartment with a loving partner, ignoring all this tangible reality to torture herself with an abstract construct. She felt a pang of shame, but the mind, when challenged, often doubles down. The discomfort turned into irritated defensiveness. "It's not the same thing. This is my work, my reputation. It's not a whim, it's a professional necessity," she retorted, her voice sharper than she intended. She got up from the table, the phone still glued to her hand like a poisoned lifeline. "I need an answer. I'm going to call Julia. She has closer contact with the client's team." Sophia didn't try to stop her anymore. She simply nodded, her heart heavy, and began to clear the plates. The connection had been broken. Elisa was no longer there. She was in the hallway, dialing the number, her breath a little short. The search for the lemon of professional validation had become a mission, and she was willing to deny the peace of her domestic sanctuary, to neglect the love of her partner, to achieve it. The trap of the restless mind had snapped shut, and Elisa, temporarily, saw no way out. She only saw the urgent and illusory need to continue that exhaustive search, convinced that the only path to tranquility was through external confirmation, never through the simple act of silencing the internal demand. And now, a pause for a sincere conversation with you. This moment in the story is more common than we'd like to admit, isn't it? How many times have we, in search of our particular lemon, be it a like, a reply, an approval, an impossible perfection, let the meal get cold on the table of our own life? If you recognize yourself, even a little, in this silent battle against your own thoughts, then this channel was made for us. Subscribe to the channel Paths of the Mind. Here, we don't sell magic formulas, but we build a space for reflections that can, little by little, reconnect you with your inner peace. And if this block made you think, do me a favor. Don't just comment, I agree. Close your eyes for 5 seconds right now and identify what is your lemming at this moment. That repetitive thought, that search that is sucking your energy. Just name it mentally. This simple act of recognition is the first step for you to stop being a passenger and become the pilot of your own mind. The call to Julia, her young and dedicated assistant, was anything but comforting. The phone rang several times before a sleepy and somewhat confused voice answered on the other end. "Hello? Elisa, is everything all right?" asked Julia, clearly having been woken from a deep sleep. In the background, Elisa could hear the muffled sound of a cartoon, probably Julia's younger brother watching TV. This commonplace domestic reality, so far from the corporate crises Elisa was imagining, should have calmed her. Instead, it irritated her. How could Julia be so carefree while the reputation of their studio was supposedly on the line? "Julia, sorry to bother you so late," said Elisa, trying to mask the urgency in her voice with a professional tone. "It's about the Mr. Fernandez project. You didn't receive any additional emails or messages from his team today, did you? Nothing that might suggest dissatisfaction?" There was a silence on the other end of the line, laden with confusion. "Dissatisfaction? No, Elisa. On the contrary, their thank you email was super positive, remember? They even used the word delighted." "I believe the case is closed." Every word from Julia should have been a bomb, but to Elisa's mind, now in hunt mode, they sounded like evasion. Delighted could just be professional jargon empty of real meaning. "Are you sure, Julia? Sometimes the real feedback comes through informal channels. A comment in the hallway," Elisa insisted, her voice now carrying a tension she could no longer hide. Another silence. "Elisa," Julia said softly, her voice taking on an almost maternal tone. "It's 9:30 on a Friday night. I was asleep. My 12-year-old brother is watching SpongeBob. I don't think there's any corporate conspiracy happening. The project was a success, I promise." It was the SpongeBob that finally broke something inside Elisa. The image was so absurdly ordinary, so mundane and innocent, that it contrasted violently with the elaborate, dark drama her mind had constructed. She was standing here, in the hallway of her apartment, practically interrogating her sleepy assistant about a satisfied client, while cartoons played in the background. The futility of her mission, the colossal disparity between reality and the fiction of her anxiety, hit her like a bucket of cold water. Right, Julia. Sorry to have bothered you. Go back to sleep," she said, her voice suddenly weak. "No problem. Good night, Elisa," Julia replied, and the line went dead. The silence in the hallway was now oppressive. The phone in her hand felt heavy and useless. She had followed her mind's command to its logical conclusion. She had sought external confirmation, and the confirmation she received was, "Stop it, everything is fine." There was nowhere left to run, no other shop to check, no other contact to bother. The search had reached a dead end, and the only sounds were the echo of her own breathing and the soft noise of dishes being washed in the kitchen by Sophia. Elisa slid down the wall to sit on the cold hallway floor. The exhaustion she felt was no longer just physical. It was a profound mental fatigue, the tiredness of having run a marathon to get nowhere. She looked at the slightly open kitchen door, where she could see Sophia's back as she methodically dried a plate. That simple domestic scene, Sophia's silent patience, hurt more than any confrontation. Elisa realized that in her obsessive search for a professional lemon, She had ignored and devalued the entire orchard she already possessed. A successful career, a loyal partner, a peaceful home. Her mind, in its insatiable demand for more, had blinded her to the abundance already present. The great turning point was not a bang, but a whisper of clarity that emerged from the weariness. Elisa realized that the search was, in itself, the problem. Peace would not be found in the next message or the next guarantee. Peace could only be found the moment she decided to stop searching. The lemon wasn't real. The only real things were the cold floor beneath her, the smell of the now cold dinner, and the woman in the kitchen she was neglecting. For the first time that night, instead of fighting the voice in her head or obeying it, Elisa simply heard it, acknowledged its presence, and consciously chose not to follow it. She hadn't found her lemon. She had decided she didn't need it. She remained sitting on the cold hallway floor for what felt like an eternity, though it was no more than a few minutes. The stillness of that moment was not empty. It was dense, filled with the recognition of her own temporary madness. The fog of anxiety was beginning to dissipate, not through heroic effort, but through simple exhaustion. Elisa was tired of herself, tired of the catastrophe narrative her mind insisted on weaving. When she finally stood up, her legs were a little shaky, but her mind, for the first time that night, was in relative silence, like the echo of a storm that had passed. Entering the kitchen, Sophia didn't turn around immediately. She kept drying the same cup, giving Elisa the space to approach in her own time. The air between them was heavy, but not hostile. It was the weight of an exposed truth. "Sophia." Elisa's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. She leaned against the doorframe, too drained to go further. I think I spent the whole night looking for a lemon." Sophia finally turned. Her eyes showed no anger or triumph, but a deep compassion. She placed the dry cup on the counter and wiped her hands on the dish towel. "I know," she said simply. "And did you find it?" Elisa shook her head, a sad, crooked smile forming on her lips. "No. And worse, I realized I didn't even want it. The search was the only point. It was about proving to my mind that it was right to be worried, not about finding a solution to a real problem." She paused, looking at her hands. "I threw the lemon away before I even touched it." That was the metaphor that resonated perfectly between them. Sophia understood completely. She moved closer, not for an immediate hug, but to be within her reach. "And how do you feel now that you don't have the lemon?" she asked, her tone one of genuine curiosity, not provocation. Elisa took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the kitchen air that now smelled of dish soap and no longer of tomato sauce. "I feel an emptiness, but it's a strange emptiness. It's peaceful. It's the void that remains when you stop filling your head with unnecessary noise." She looked around, truly seeing the tidy kitchen, the extinguished candle, the tiredness on Sophia's face. I'm sorry I ruined our evening." "You didn't ruin it," Sophia replied, closing the distance and placing a gentle hand on Elisa's arm. "You just got lost for a while. The important thing is that you came back. The evening is still here. I'm still here." It was true. The night wasn't over. The imaginary problem held no real power, except the power she herself had granted it. In that moment, Elisa understood the fundamental difference between reacting and responding. The anxious mind reacts impulsively to every thought, like a puppet being pulled by strings of fear and desire. The conscious mind responds. It observes the thought, assesses its validity, and then chooses the wisest action or non-action. The lesson wasn't to suppress thoughts or become a cold, impassive person. The lesson was about sovereignty. It was about retaking command of the ship when you realize it was on autopilot, heading towards a destination of unnecessary suffering. Elisa's lemon was the need for control, an absolute guarantee. The act of throwing it away was the moment of surrender, of accepting that some uncertainties must be tolerated, that life, like dinner, is sometimes perfect in its completeness, even when an imaginary ingredient is missing from our mind's recipe. She hadn't mastered her mind forever that night. That would be a continuous battle. But she had won a crucial skirmish. She had proven to herself that it was possible. And this knowledge, this small spark of self-efficacy, was more valuable than any external confirmation she could have pursued. The quietude that followed was not awkward, but restorative. Elisa helped Sophia finish tidying the kitchen, and each put-away plate, each cleaned surface, felt like a symbolic act of internal reorganization. The phone was finally left charging in the bedroom, far from the sacred space of the living room. Sitting on the sofa, wrapped in the comfort of silence and reconnection, Elisa began to unravel the threads that had woven the trap of that evening. "You know, Sophia," she began, looking at her intertwined hands, "it wasn't just about the project. It was as if that small detail, that client's pause, was the perfect crack my mind needed to validate all the other insecurities I carry. It's like I have a mental list of evidence that I'm not good enough, and any little thing becomes the final piece of a puzzle that is never complete." Sophia listened, gently stroking her arm. "What other pieces are in this puzzle?" she asked, without judgment. Elisa took a deep breath. "The piece of, I didn't charge enough for the last project. The piece of that colleague who posted an amazing piece of work on social media. The piece of, I should have gone to the gym today and didn't. The piece of, I should be reading that important book instead of resting. It's an endless collection of should-haves and could-have-dones." She paused, surprised by the clarity of her own insight. Today's lemon was just the loudest scream amidst all this background noise. That was it. The restless mind does not operate in a vacuum. It feeds on a pre-existing narrative of inadequacy, fear, and distorted self-demand. The specific incident, the lemon, the client's pause, is merely the bait, the hook that activates an entire chain of automatic negative thoughts. The person doesn't just react to the present event. They react to the entire history of insecurities that the event symbolizes. Sophia nodded in understanding. So the battle isn't against a single thought, but against this whole ecosystem of internal noise. "Exactly," Elisa confirmed. "And I realized that trying to argue with each individual thought is like wiping ice. It's tiring and useless. What worked, even if just for a moment, was noticing the pattern. It was looking at all this frantic searching and realizing, look, it's my restless mind acting up again. It's the same old movie." And when you name the pattern, when you see the play your mind is staging, you take away some of its power. You stop being the lead actor, desperate on stage, and become the spectator watching from the audience. This shift in perspective, from actor to spectator, is the essence of metacognition, the ability to think about one's own thinking. It is the space between the stimulus and the response where true freedom resides. In that hallway, after ending the call with Julia, Elisa hadn't suppressed the anxiety. She had created a millimeter of space around it, and in that millimeter, she found choice. The conversation flowed to other things, to weekend plans, to a funny memory from a trip, to the simple pleasure of being together without the interference of devices or internal demands. The peace Elisa felt now wasn't the absence of problems, but the presence of an inner serenity that remained intact, even while acknowledging that problems, both real and imaginary, still existed out there. She had, even if temporarily, disidentified from her turbulent mind. She wasn't being her anxiety. She had anxiety, and that makes all the difference in the world. And so we arrive at the heart of the matter, at the lesson that unfolds not as a destination, but as a compass. Elisa's story isn't about a battle won forever, but about a map drawn in the middle of the storm. It's about recognizing that peace isn't a distant territory to be conquered, but a muscle to be exercised here and now, even when the mind whispers phantom urgencies. True mental mastery doesn't resemble an ice statue, impassive and unshakable. It's more like bamboo in a forest. It bends with the wind. It may even touch the ground under the force of the storm, but its root remains firm. And when the gale passes, it rises again, intact in its essence. The restless mind is that wind, and you, the awareness observing it, are both the bamboo and the root. You do not need to stop the wind, an impossible task. You only need to remember your own capacity to bend without breaking, to allow thoughts to pass without being kidnapped by them. Elisa learned that the lemons in life are infinite. Tomorrow it might be the need to check email before coffee, the impulse to compare your life to someone else's on social media, the craving for a sweet treat when you're already full, or the irritation at a casual comment. Each of these impulses is a small scream from the mind for something external to fill an internal void. The art of living in peace isn't about eliminating all desires, but about developing the discernment to know which ones are worth following and which are merely echoes of a mind conditioned to constant wanting. And it is here, dear soul, who has accompanied me this far, that this story ceases to be just about Elisa and becomes about you. Because you have your lemons too. Perhaps they aren't a client's email, but they are those subtle voices that whisper you're not enough, that you should be somewhere else, that you need that specific thing to be happy. Those voices are the current, and your conscious attention is the anchor. And now I'd like to extend an invitation that goes beyond a simple subscribe. This channel, Internal Roots, is a lighthouse for all of us, navigators of our own minds. Here, we don't promise always calm seas, but we share navigation charts, techniques for adjusting the sails, and stories from other travelers who, like you and me, are learning to navigate the sometimes turbulent waters of the human condition. If you found a refuge, an aha moment, or simply felt less alone hearing Elisa's story, join our community by subscribing to the channel. Here, we grow together. And if this content resonated with you, I have a special request. In the comments, I would love to know, what was your lemon of the week, that thought or impulse that tried to take control of your emotional steering wheel? And more importantly, what superpower did you use, or could you use next time, to remember that you are the pilot? It could be a deep breath, a walk, turning off notifications, or simply telling yourself, it's just a thought, not a command. Let's transform the comments into a collective logbook, a space for vulnerability and mutual learning. Share your story. Your experience could be the lighthouse that illuminates someone else's path. Thank you for embarking on this journey of reflection. Remember, peace is a practice, not a prize. And every time you choose not to run after the lemon, you are quietly and powerfully reclaiming the governance of your own life. With gratitude and hope to see you again here on the next journey inward.